Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is a game designer, blogger, and all-round advocate for gaming. Born in Iran and raised in Scotland, she developed a love for computer games first, and later that blossomed into the tabletop. She designed Yogi, Wibble, and other games for the Wibble++ deck, with a new game coming out each year. She has a daily blog on Board Game Geek, a weekly internet radio show, and an advocate for inclusion in gaming. My guest this week is Bez Sharihari. Bez, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute delight. And yeah, I've been really impressed with everything so far.
Well, thank you very much. Well, to begin, how difficult was it for you to pick the games?
Oh, it was super difficult. I mean, part of me wants to obviously think about, okay, if we had this real life situation, what big boxes would go well for kindling? What boxes would, kind of gaming the system as every gamer wants to do. So maybe Gloomhaven, for example, would be the ideal thing for just having lots of stuff to burn a fire with to keep yourself warm at the end of the world. And then obviously I thought, okay, I'm not going to do that. And then I thought, okay, maybe I will go down the road of having traditional decks of cards. What can I do? And then in the end, I decided, okay, I'm going to try, and I think it was your previous guest, Rainer Knizia, who said that they just looked at their shelves, picked 5 games, and decided that's it. And that's exactly what I did. So I tried to simulate the situation and gave myself a minute to make the choice. So after weeks of deliberating, that was it. And I guess, yeah, there you go.
So weeks of deliberating led to a 2-minute snap decision then, basically?
Exactly. I mean, sometimes there is no perfect choice, and I'm sure that as the giant cream cake lasers beam down from the sky and everything falls down into rubble around me, I'm sure there'll be games that I miss, but that's part of the point, isn't it? About not only what you get to keep, but what you don't get to keep.
So do you think you feel quite sanguine about the games you've left behind? You don't feel any sort of pangs of guilt?
Well, I'm a hoarder, and obviously with the games left behind, it's not just objects. These games, they're not even just memories. Some of them are things that have been given to me by dear friends, from other designers, from people that I really respect. And one thing that I didn't understand about becoming a designer is that you are given the affordance to start swapping your own games with other people. And Friedman Fries looks upon you as some sort of equal, which to my mind is amazing. But that's it. At the end of the day, we're just all people trying to make games, trying to bring about enjoyment. But I see something and I think, oh, this has all this meaning behind it, this has all this potential, this has all these thousands of hours of games that could be played with it, but you've got to make a choice somewhere, and honestly, you can't keep looking ahead into the time when civilization was still around us. I mean, if this is going to be the death of the world, then I guess there's bigger problems to worry about to some extent.
So do you think you mentioned this, do you think there's some sort of unofficial union of game designers and you sort of see the hobby from a slightly different angle from the rest of us plebs?
Oh, not at all. I mean, there's no dichotomy. It's not as if, oh, you're either a board game designer or you're not. I mean, to a certain degree, everyone who thinks critically about a game, anyone who institutes a house rule, okay, boom, you're a game designer. As long as you make that decision consciously and it's not just something handed down from your grandma or some unintentional misinterpretation of the rules. If I look at Carcassonne and then you decide to draw the tile at the end of your turn and keep it until your next turn, well, you're thinking critically, you're doing the work of a game designer. Sorry, someone said on a previous podcast, if you aren't printing 5,000, why even bother? And that almost made me want to scream like, fuck off. I mean, if you think that what you want to do is make one copy of a game for your friends, that's totally valid. If you want to make 100 copies because your game is so super niche that the only people who will like it are people who spent their childhood in Margate and have a massive fondness for it, then that's fair enough. You're bringing joy to the world, and whatever you want to do is completely fine. And yes, there's some things that might be better if you're looking at it as a business, and some things that might be better if you're making your game for me or other more gamery people, but there's just such a massive variety of people who could be playing games, and games don't all need to fit the same purpose. So yeah, I hate the whole, the barriers that people put up, I hate that.
And so do you see game designing as an artistic venture or a commercial venture or both, or is the question irrelevant?
Well, I guess it's a personal journey for everyone. I mean, for me, I'm fortunate in that my first thing in a bind was picked up by a larger company, and I think it is a very good game. I hope it doesn't make me sound like an arrogant twat, but other people have enjoyed it, and it sold tens of thousands in the first few months of being released as Yogi, so I guess my arrogance is a bit vindicated. But I'm lucky in that this is a game that could actually be properly mass market, and starting next year, I might reach the point where, okay, I'm not super rich, but I'm earning, 12,000 a year, fingers crossed, and then whatever I make from my other stuff doesn't really matter, and that gives me the affordance to make stuff for tiny niche audiences. And if you want to do something artistic, if you want to express yourself in some way, that's also fine. And it's not just like one size fits all, this is good for this person. It's like everyone wants to do a bit of everything. And if you can make money, then great. But the projects that you want to make money with, you need to treat them in a different way. You want to get artistic gratification from. And I think it's important as a creator to be honest with yourself and say, why am I doing this? And then you can maybe do it a bit better. And yeah, like I said before, whatever the fuck you want to do is okay, but be honest with yourself, and you can skip from one motivation to the other.
Great. So let's go back to the beginning. So you came over to Britain from Iran. What do you remember about living there?
So, I'm sorry, my autobiography, maybe I was a bit unclear, but I actually was born in Glasgow. So, I used to travel to Iran every summer when I was a ween or a wee one, as they say in Scotland. And I just remember, honestly, open air swimming pools. That's my biggest memory of the scorching heat, of trying to chase the shadows at noon, trying to huddle up inside between the hours of 12 and 2 o'clock because it's too hot for anyone to tolerate, and the shadows are literally a couple of millimeters at most. And that's it. But there were friendships and going around, and I remember so many pirated console games, not just CDs, which are fairly prevalent here in the UK, but also so many pirated cartridges for the SNES and the Mega Drive which I found astounding because, yeah, how could these even things exist? It boggled my young mind. And just seeing another world.
And how did it contrast to Scotland? I mean, apart from the weather. I mean, because we have in the West a picture of what Iran is. To what degree is that moulded by the media and is false? And yeah, to what degree did it change? Was it different from Scotland? And how was your reaction to that?
Honestly, I think that there's a lot of truth in what the media says. The government in Iran are egregious. I think there's a lot of horrible things going on. There's a lot of human rights that are being infringed upon. They actually ban certain types of music, for example. And if you are found in possession of this type of music, then yes, you might be able to bribe the policeman to look the other way, but if you are found out, you could get you could be imprisoned, or even suffer corporal punishment. But at the same time, there's some real political responsibility and awareness that, sad as it is to say, it seems to only emerge when things are really dire. And I think that in today's climate, with Donald Trump being the leader of the United States of America, and Brexit's happening, and there's a lot of people that are realising that you can't just carry on and ignore all politics, because things are going to happen around you, and whether or not you do something about it, things will happen. And so in Iran, people actually did so much more demonstrating, and there was so much more awareness and education, in my opinion. And so I think that more of this, sad as it is to say, because as the situation in the West turns a little bit sour and people start to be discriminated against in the US, and we start to see massive political upheaval, I think that we are going to come closer together in some ways, and hopefully long term.
And so when did gaming first enter your life? You said in your biography that you spent a lot of time playing video games as a kid. When did tabletop games come into your life?
Well, I guess it's the same as a lot of people. I remember multi-hour epics of Monopoly and Risk. And yes, we played by the correct rules. And yes, I enjoyed the game. It's not a game that I have the time for these days, but I love the auctions and just being able to engage with other people around the table. Then going to university, originally thinking that I was going to be a video game designer, and then drifting away from that, going into Go and meeting people that way, and then falling into modern Eurogames via Puerto Rico. That must have been about 10, 12 years ago. And yes, I just loved games of all sorts, so it was only natural that I was going to fall in love with these better designed games that, had enjoyed the benefit of so many years of knowledge.
And so do you think that tabletop gaming is inherently more social than video gaming, or is that a misnomer?
I think it is. Even if you play the most mathematical game like Power Grid, let's say, you can be making some lovely decisions and be really clever about what you've done, but then you get the opportunity to look up at everybody else and to smirk at them and to say, hey, I'm better than you. Or, hey, we've shared this moment from a less, or just to say, hey, we're enjoying this time together and be face to face with each other. I think there's something magical about that.
So let's move on to your first game. So you've chosen Moral Dilemma. And so can you briefly explain what this is for people who aren't familiar with the game?
Well, Moral Dilemma is a game I backed on Kickstarter some long time ago, and I only actually really got the chance to enjoy it for what it is when my housemates came over. And some games are all about judging what people put into a communal pool, but Moral Dilemma is about having a communal pool of would you do this or that, and it's not about deciding which of people's arbitrary offerings is best. It's about the joy of deciding, would you do this or that? For example, if some of the cards might be fairly rude, and so one of them might have been, if you're up in a 0G gravity space, do you fuck your sexy co-pilot or not? And then some of those decisions are a bit less obvious than that one. And it's just a game that facilitates discussion. That's it.
And so is that why it's going to the cabin? Because it'll sort of generate bonhomie and those sorts of things?
Exactly. And I thought to myself, genuinely, that it's about establishing rapport with other people and learning about other people, because how often are you going to talk about genocide and about whether murder is okay in this certain circumstance, or whether this thing is okay? Yes, you can skirt around the issue with other games, but Moral Dilemma actually asks you to answer the question honestly. Which choice would you choose and why? And by going round the table with everyone as we establish this new society, we'll be able to learn about each other. We'll be able to establish trust and bonhomie, as you say.
So is there something specific about party games that appeals to you?
It's a bit of a vague term, isn't it? Party games. But I think that these kinds of lighter games, just by virtue of being super accessible, and you can't always be playing with the most, arithmetic-based, geeky people who are like, oh yes, I love to... I mean, I'm not beating down on those people, I'm one of them myself. But my point is that party games just put the focus more on the person and make them accessible. And to my mind, those are the two defining traits of party games. And those are traits that surely, why wouldn't you have them if you could? Accessibility and focusing and learning on other people.
I mean, do you think that there is an element of sort of sniffiness around these games within the board gaming community?
Yeah, there definitely is, I think. I think that any sniffiness and any derision these days has started to evaporate. And as people become more aware that other people play games for different reasons, I think that, yes, there are some people who would say, no, I won't play but I've not experienced anyone, thank goodness, who would just say that is qualitatively a worse game.
Okay, so let's move on to your designing. So, I mean, you've become a gamer, you've played Monopoly, you've played Risk, and then you've moved on to sort of more established kind of gamer games. When did you transfer from being a player to a designer, and why?
I think that it happened decades ago when I was barely a toddler. Even when I was in primary school, I have such distinct memories of my brothers playing all these games on Spectrum, and I knew Mega Drive games. I didn't have one of my own, but if I wasn't able to play something, I would be imagining levels. I would be drawing down levels on bits of paper that would never be made. And the first time that I was actually able to code something, I did. I think it was just a natural part of my personality that if I love something, if I just wanted to engage myself and make it as well, because games were so amazing to me that not only did I want to partake, I wanted to have a hand in their potential of what they could possibly be.
Where does that come from? Is it for the intrinsic joy of creating something? Or is it about eliciting a reaction in others and thinking, I contributed to that?
I think it's definitely both, and parts of it's just a respect for the medium, because I remember thinking that video games had such potential and so much of it hadn't been tapped. I mean, Portal was one of, and when games started going into single player, multiplayer, like Cursor Asterisk 10 as a video game, then you start thinking this is something that only a video game can do. And by the same token, there are board games that you see, this dexterity game, this is something that only a board game can do. And just to want to push that, I think part of it is the healthy respect for the medium. And yes, having that joy of creation. But ultimately, for me, if I'm being honest, I do absolutely crave validation in everything that I do. And whether it's the blog or social media or drawings, I think that I would be lying if I said that I wasn't doing it primarily to elicit joy from others.
And so you said you initially wanted to be a video game designer. What changed? What pushed you into the tabletop arena?
I think two things. Firstly, I discovered modern board games, and I became aware of how much board games had advanced and started getting more into them. I had tried my hand at making games with decks of traditional playing cards before, but seeing these amazing things like Puerto Rico was just incredible, and San Juan. And then secondly, my realization that as a video game designer, so much of it wasn't something I enjoyed. I hate programming. I abhor it, I despise it, and I loathe it. And so to do board games, that allowed me to ignore that whole aspect, and I enjoy drawing things. I don't much care for the logistics, but at least the logistics part of board game publication is a hell of a lot easier and less time consuming than the programming. And so if I want to make something myself and have absolute creative control, then board games are clearly the way to go.
So was In a Bind your first game design?
It was my first mass-published thing, but I don't think any designer can honestly say that their first published thing is their first game. Because even if it's your first prototype and then it mutates, there's so many things that inform what it finally becomes. And I had so many ideas before. I think the first thing that I was saying, this is a thing that I'm making that I want people to enjoy. I'd done that for several years before that, even with aspirations of putting it up onto Kickstarter. But I think In a Bind was the first thing where I had developed enough maturity to think, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to make a small deck of cards. I'm going to work within these restrictions. I'm going to keep it something simple, and hopefully lots of people will enjoy it. And maturity in order to think not just about what could be possible, but what could be possible for me, given my own limitations right then.
And so you said it's sold quite a few copies. Are you surprised by how well it's been received?
Again, I'm going to sound like an arrogant twat, but honestly, no. When I did the Kickstarter, this might sound atrocious, but I almost worried that it would get too big. And I thought, okay, just in case I end up selling thousands and thousands or ridiculous numbers of copies, I made sure to charge enough so that I would be able to pay someone else for fulfillment and to take care of things if that happened. But it funded on the last day by me basically begging to my friends, and another 50 of them came along, which got me the £3,000 I absolutely needed to be able to afford the printing. And at this point, I knew it was good, and I'd seen people play it at conventions, and I'd seen people enjoy it. So I think, again, I worry about sounding like an arrogant twat, but there's an ability to think beyond yourself, not just think, okay, I enjoy this game, but also think, okay, you know what, this is a game that I believe millions of people will enjoy. And honestly, I doubt I'll ever make anything with the same mass market potential. Realistically, you never know, but realistically, that's going to be the best thing, the most financially successful thing I ever make. But I'm at the same time incredibly lucky that, fingers crossed, in a couple of years, it stood me in good stead to be able to now focus on other things, for which I am immensely grateful.
I mean, it seems to me it's not a question of arrogance. I think part of being a professional is understanding when something's good, and especially understanding when you've caught lightning in a bottle, no?
That's true. And the whole aspect of being a game designer is one of curation, because you have hundreds of ideas in your head, and other playtesters give you thousands of ideas. So it is down to you to decide which one of these is going to appeal to the biggest number of players, and which one of these will facilitate your goals, whether that's maximizing joy or making it mass market or making it the best possible game for people who really love Margate. I don't know why I'm fixated on Margate today.
It's a beautiful town.
It is lovely. Yeah, it's up to you to think about things and think about the ramifications. So you're right. You need to be able to step outside of yourself.
So your next game is Codex. Why is Codex going to the cabin?
Well, Codex was made by Dave Serlin, and I have a confession that I still haven't played it. And based on one of your previous guests, I thought, okay, I'll go the same way. I will pick a game I have never played, but has so much potential. This is the most expensive game I have in my possession. It cost me, I think, 220, something like that, quid. And Dave Serlin looked at Magic the Gathering, and Serlin is a very critical designer. Serlin is not unafraid to shit on people. And so, basically, Codex was essentially their answer to Magic the Gathering, saying, here's a bunch of cards, you will be able to combine these into a few hundred different permutations. It's not the millions or billions or whatever that you get with Magic the Gathering, but it is a few hundred viable decks. And you have... Dave Serlin has an amazing history of balancing things at the top tier. And I wanted to have a game where I'm exploring something that has been very deliberately made by someone. Something where I know it's going to survive for thousands of plays. I go to a cabin and there's only 5 games. That seems like the perfect scenario to pick something that's, with infinite scope, hopefully.
Do you think, part of, being in the hobby is acquiring games as much as playing games, especially when I see that on Twitter a lot. Do you think that we miss out on this sort of notion of deep diving, really exploring, learning to become as close as experts in one sort of game system?
Well, I think that to enjoy that sort of level of engagement, you need to have something which you treat as a lifestyle game, whether that's the classics, Go, backgammon, chess, or indeed Magic the Gathering. I think that at the top level, there is an amazing amount of joy to be had, but I think there is also just as much joy to be had by enjoying the variety of things. I don't think that one necessarily comes at the expense of the other.
Yeah, I kind of find myself at times regretting not sort of playing a game to its logical conclusion and becoming really good at it. But also, at the same time, the minute I finish playing a game and someone suggests, oh, should we play this again? My heart sinks and I just think, no, I want to play something different. So I find myself really torn between these two states at times.
It's a weird one. I had a very close friend in Glasgow where I went to Primordial Gaming Group, and over there every week we would tend to play different games, and my friend would complain and tell me, yeah, I don't want to go there anymore because I don't like learning rules. And I think that a good way to go about it might be to select one or two games that actually deserve this deep dive, because frankly not every game does. And honestly, even in a Bind or Yogi, I think it's a good enough game that after a few hundred plays of it, I still sometimes enjoy it, but it's not as if I'm enjoying it at a much deeper level than I did my first or second time. But then you've got something like Pelos, the abstract game from Gigamic, or indeed Go, and in there, you're playing it, and then each time you play, you notice little things about the game, you notice little patterns, and you need to have a game that actually has stood up to the test of time for thousands, or in the case of Go, millions of hours, before you can say, yes, this is a game that deserves your deep dive. So maybe part of that is playing games that are a little bit older.
So moving on then. So in your bio, I was struck by a line that said, in London, thanks to the anonymity offered by population density, I allowed myself to dress as I wanted and explore the dynamic of gender. What did you mean by that?
Very simply, that in Glasgow, there's few enough people that if you want to do things a little strange, not that I totally shied away from that, but you do have to be somewhat careful about offending people or turning people away. Whereas in London, I guess there are so many people that it's not a case of, oh, this is the most, these are the few board gamers that I know and I need to keep them in my life, or these are the few improv people, or whatever hobby or pastimes you want to share, or the friends. It's a case of, well, this is who I am, and if you don't like me as I am, in London there's, I don't know, how many million other people within a few miles of here, and so I'm probably going to be willing and able to find someone else who accepts me as I am if you're not.
I mean, and did you, so for people who don't know Bez has a big beard but also dresses in a skirt and tights. I mean, did you find that, was there a fear in Glasgow that you might be assaulted, hit, abused on the street for dressing how you wish to dress?
That's definitely a part of it. I mean, there is definitely bits of fear, and, you know, as someone who is noticeably not, I'm a person of colour. I'm not the darkest skinned person. I'm clearly not native Scottish or English either. And so going around Glasgow, honestly, I had abuse hurled at me verbally just based on the fact that I had a moustache in primary school. And I had abuse hurled at me sometimes just based on my skin colour or when I was in Maryhill, which honestly in London it has still sometimes happened. Sometimes cycling around, which I find marginally impressive because it must be so ingrained that they think of it so quickly and then shout it out before I've passed them on my bike, bear in mind that I'm cycling most of the time. And so sometimes, yeah, I do hear people shouting things in London even. But even so, I think there is some degree of safety in numbers. And if you're on a busier street, you're going to be safer than you are in the back alleys. And by the same token, if you've got hundreds of people around you, you're more likely to be able to do whatever you want. And if someone, points at you and gives you shit, then people are more likely to hopefully call them up on their shit. And if it was going to lead to physical violence, then I'd like to think that it would be more likely to stop with a crowd around.
And so there's been a lot of discussion recently, a lot of anger expended, a lot of energy over the notion of gender and what gender is. I mean, what do you think gender is?
Honestly, part of me thinks that it is a societal construct, and it's something that should go away. I think that basically society believes that people of a particular biological sex should be more in line with doing these particular things, more in tune with this particular mindset, and might have more enjoyment of these things and less for those. And these assumptions, that set of assumptions based on your sex, is part of what gender is. And I think that this is a really unhealthy thing. And I think that in a few decades, we are probably, I hope, going to move towards just not having the words he or she in our vocabulary. Because I think just by separating people into these two states, yeah, people can say, I don't make assumptions based on people. But for 99% of folk, that's bullshit. You have so many assumptions, and I think that assuming things is fine because we don't realistically have the time to get to know everyone intimately. And so you need to assume based on first impressions, based on how people look. You need to do that to survive. But what's wrong is when you're not willing to accept that A, your assumptions might be completely the opposite of the truth, and B, you're not willing to change your assumptions. And I think that the whole notion of gender goes into that.
I mean, do you think there's a comfort and a surety in about having an identity that you grasp onto? So being a Liverpool fan or, being a gamer or being a man or a woman. And do you think there are beneficial aspects to a conception of identity that isn't fluid?
No, it's a really hard question. And whether this sort of tribalism can be healthy. And certainly if you see a group and you're feeling some connection to the group and you're wanting to build other people within the group up, that's great. But then the problem comes when you see it as a them and us mantra. And I've seen it so many places where people talk about, friend was talking about some horrible things that had happened to her at Origins, and some person said, this is someone trying to make the place less safe for men, and this is someone trying to get in the way of men's fun. These kinds of people exist, where they're talking about a pure us and them mentality, and there is an enemy born of it. And in football, if you're going to say, I support England and I hope that they win this match, then that's fine. But at the point where it turns into hooliganism, then that's a horrible aspect. And for whatever reason, tribalism has both, it can really turn ugly in an instant.
And so you go by the pronoun she. Have you found that within the gaming community,
there are people who find that difficult to deal with, or have you found it very, very easy?
There's definitely, I would say the majority of people don't tend to remember. And I try to remind people. I just prefer to move away from, and no one has intentionally, I don't think, called me he just to antagonise. And if someone did do that, I'd think that that's just a bloody-minded dick move. And honestly, that's the kind of poison that you don't really want in your life. But I guess I'm, again, quite lucky in that I did come to it from a position of some power, because Rob Harris, founder of Playtest UK, had entrusted me with running some of the playtests, which was fantastic. And so when I came out and said, you know what, this is something I'm exploring, I'd like to be called she, and when I first went along dressed in a skirt, I was given some confidence by the fact that I wasn't just a newcomer to the scene. I had, I guess, a tiny bit of respect from being in charge of some of these meetups. And yeah, people do forget, but people, from what I've experienced, are generally good about it. And I'd like it if some people, obviously some people put in a bit more effort than others to remember, but you know, that's the way it is.
So going on to your next game, it's one of yours, and that's Wibble Plus Plus. And I'm sat there literally with it in my hands in front of me. So can you explain the origin of this game?
Okay, so first I guess I should say that I am sort of cheating with this one, because it's not a game, it's a game system. But I thought, you know, given what other people have said, I can get away.
I think you're cheating quite a lot more further down the line, so this one's perfectly fine.
Well, we'll get to that. But, so Wibble Plus Plus, it started off as Wibble, which is a really fast word game. I have a word game that I love called Prolix by Gulhova, which has recently been redesigned and reissued as Wordsy. And this is something that I adored. And in January 2015, I was trying to come up with a game design every day and write it up on a BGG blog, which I did for about 80 days. And one of the early ones that I did while cycling, which seems to be the origin of a lot of my good game ideas, was, okay, let's think about how we can take Prolix. I was thinking, okay, what if there were some catch-up mechanism, which honestly is the crux of the game, where you need to say words with a letter from each card in the middle, and then as you manage to do that, if you manage to do that first, you take one of the cards, and another card comes out. You now need to use 3 cards, everyone else just needs to use 2. I realised that having 1 letter per card would make it too difficult, so I thought, okay, what if we have 2 letters per card? I made some design decisions, I played it, it worked great, and as time went on, I came up with other ideas that could be played with the same deck, and it was going to UK Games Expo later in 2015 that I'd come with 4 games that I quite liked, and Andrew Dennison made a game called Alphabetical, which is all about putting things into alphabetical order, essentially using those letters as a sequence. Now, this hadn't occurred to me. I had games about matching, about storytelling, about using them for phrases and words, but having something just about them as an alphabetical order, it made me realise, yes, if someone is able to come up with this idea that I would never have thought of, I'm sure there must be more. And I can see just so much potential that the choice was, do I publish it as Wibble, or do I publish it as Wibble Plus Plus, i.e. the game with the potential to have so much more? And my choice after seeing Alphabetical was clear, that I should go ahead with the whole game system. And in the time since, I only released it properly in 1st of August 2017. And I now have, I think, about 20 games on the website for it. I've run a competition and I've had about 10 submissions. I'm looking at having a fully finished game every year, and I see no end in sight for new games for the system. I think that ultimately I'm going to continue focusing on curating this for as long as I'm working in game design.
And so do you think this syncs with your game designing ethos? And if it does, what is your ethos, essentially?
Do we need to have an ethos?
No, absolutely. If you don't have an ethos, that's perfectly fine too.
I mean, I was trying to work out a company motto. I decided that what my motto is to maximize the amount of fun that people have with my stuff. And so that means that, yes, some things I will give away for free. If someone literally can't afford it, then I want to get to a state where I am continually making donations or very cheap copies to schools and hospitals and places where games could do incredible good but aren't present. I want to make games that are accessible to people. But if there's a game that's going to bring incredible joy to someone, then yeah, I want to make that absolute niche game. And with Wibble++, I guess part of it is, someone asked me, how are you going to sell more copies if you're making more and more games for the one deck? And my response to that is basically, well, if it's a mass market game, which I think it has the potential to one day be, well, you continue selling more copies, but it's about reaching more people, and it's not about always what's financially the best option or what's it's about just making good games and bringing people together. So I guess, to some degree, the Wibble++ community, because people are starting to come together to make games and to be part of this network of people expanding the universe of what's possible with this deck and getting everyone involved. I guess, sure, everyone's having fun. So, I don't know. I've not really answered your question, but yeah.
So going on then, I want to talk sort of about representation in gaming, because it seems that gaming has become very febrile at the moment. What do you think is the state of the hobby right now? Do you think it's in a good place? Do you think these discussions are useful, or does it concern you the direction it's heading?
I think it is in a good place. I think that in order to heal, sometimes you need to open up the wounds. And I think that just now, people might be thinking, oh, what's going on? Why is this happening? But the truth is, it's always been happening, and it's now that people have the strength and the support in place to actually stand up and say what's going on. And I hope dearly that I will see a day within a few years that this never happens, and that I don't know, it'll probably always happen to a tiny degree, but that will become rarer and rarer, and hopefully people will be willing to speak up. And it's just, unfortunately, we need to face the problem before it can be solved. And so, as ugly as it might seem to someone, I think that it's in a very good place.
And so do you genuinely have faith these differences of opinion can be overcome and that we can move on together regardless of because it seems, especially in America, it seems to be really cut down the middle politically between left and right. Do you think that gaming encompasses people from all along the political spectrum? Do you think we can move into a future where we all sort of get on with it and get along with each other?
Honestly, the question is bigger than gaming, as you imply, and the question is one for humanity, whether humanity can evolve and to a state where we move past, to some degree, the sense of a need to belong to a group just because we happen to share a gender or love the same football team or whatever. And I think that being able to come together and say, you know what, we share these things, we don't share those other things, and that's okay. And we are friends, but we have disagreements, and that's okay. And I respect you as a person, and I love you, and you love me, even if we don't disagree on things. And I think that I'm not sure what will happen, but you need to be optimistic, because if you're not, then in a sense, that's just an excuse to do nothing. And people who are, it's the old thing that for evil to win, the only thing that needs to happen is for good to do nothing. So we need to be pushing forwards to make this happen, and more people are standing up. And so I believe that, I hope dearly that we will come together a bit more in future decades with a bit more love and respect, not just in gaming, but in the wider world.
I mean, do you think there's a lack of empathy on both sides? People othering people and refusing to almost acknowledge certain tribes as worthy of the title of human, almost?
I wouldn't go that far, but certainly some people seem to have real problems with it. And whether it's just understanding that your words can cause real hurt and anxiety, or from a deeper level, realizing that, hey, that person has actually experienced horrible stuff, and there is something going on here, and you don't need to start calling them a liar, because why the fuck would they be lying? And honestly, when you look at rape and how trivialized it is and how difficult it is to get it accepted in court, and it's sometimes disgusting. But I don't know, I like to believe that the majority of people are intrinsically good, and some people who are lacking in empathy, yes, we need to notice that and, do what we can to sort that out.
So your next choice is not so much a game as a way to create games. So you've chosen 1,000 blank white cards. So firstly, why so many?
So I want to point out that this is on Board Game Geek as a game. So it is less all-encompassing.
I stand corrected.
So it's actually even less of a cheat, arguably, than Wibble++. But clearly, this was my one concession to, would I want to take prototyping materials? Of course I would. And in the sense of, what am I going to take? Am I going to... I've heard people talking about taking Gloomhaven because it's got lots of bits, or taking a dice game because it has so many dice in it. And 1,000 blank white cards, the game itself is a game of pure creation. It's going to be an artifact for everyone to play with. The way that 1,000 blank cards works, ostensibly, is you basically just draw one and then you play one. But as the game goes on, you can write whatever you want on these cards. Cards can give you points. You could have one giving you 1,000,000 points if you want. A social contract of, I'm not going to just write the biggest number that I can think of because that's boring. I'm going to try to think of something interesting. And it goes back to Zendo, if you play it without the cards that tell you what the rules are. It goes back to Minimao. It goes to Blank, where you have this slight framework, but then you just do whatever the hell you want with it. And honestly, maybe 50 of them I might take to make my own little game if I get bored, and I'll have pens as part of 1,000 blank cards because that's part of the game as well. But even if all I did with it was play the game as detailed on Board Game Geek, if I was there with other game designers, that would be a wonderful way to come up with a communal game. And hey, if not, I've got lots of prototyping material.
Brilliant. So where do you see yourself in the future? I mean, firstly, what do you have planned for the immediate future?
Oh, immediate future. Well, I'm going to finish off the second edition of Wibble++, release Kitty Cataclysm, and honestly, I'm going to try starting to cut down my hours, because the sad truth is, since January, I didn't really have a day off until I went to the funeral of a very close friend. And then I think it hit me at a certain point. And without going too much into it, it is starting to burn me out. And I feel like I need to say, okay, I'm going to work fewer hours for myself, because, yeah, you can only do so much. But at the same time, I love game design. I want to keep doing it. I want to keep making games for Wibble++. I want to keep releasing a new game entirely new every year. And people have asked me, oh, isn't this going to be hard, thinking of a new idea every year? To which I reply, no, it's difficult just limiting it to one a year. Because the difficult part isn't in having an idea. The difficult part is in deciding, okay, this is the best idea, and I'm going to ignore all the other ones, and I'm going to focus on this one. And having that one game a year does really well, in my opinion, for just helping to focus me. I want to get a bit more life balance going on. I want to, Kitty Cataclysm is coming out this year, Plus is coming out, and Wibble++, it will continue to be worked on forever, and eventually there will be my game with the ridiculously long title, which I won't tell you, but it starts off as A Game Wherein You Blether, which tells you all you need to know about it.
For those who aren't Scottish, blether means talk a lot.
Yes, the title carries on, open brackets, a Scottish word meaning to talk at length at a fast rate without necessarily making very much sense. And then it carries on for another 2,000 words. It is literally the longest game name ever. And it's on Board Game Geek.
And so, if you could have people describe your games in any way, what would you like that to be?
To describe them, I would like them to
if they were going to say, what is a Bez game? And you could put the words into their mouth, what would that be?
Wow, well, before you said putting the words into their mouths, I was thinking I'd like them to be fun, to be worthwhile, to be meaningful. I'd like them to say, these games, I wouldn't want to just put words in people's mouths. I would want this to be the truth, of course. But I would like my games to make people's lives better. I would like my games to bring people together, to foster meaningful relationships. That maybe someone's having a bit of a bad day, but then maybe they play a solitaire game and they smile a little. Or maybe two people who are feeling a bit anxious about speaking to each other, maybe they're a bit shy, they're on the first date, they play something and then it opens it up a bit. Maybe they're contorting themselves, or maybe they're just blethering on at each other. And that's what I'd like to think. As lofty as it might sound, even if it's a tiny bit, even if it's just making you smile a little bit more than you otherwise would if it had not existed, I'd like people to say, Bez's games made my life a little bit better.
So your final game is a huge undertaking. And this is one I've not played, and if I'm honest, I'm completely intimidated by it. This is Go. Why are you taking this to the cabin?
Part of it is because of the immense potential. So Go is an opportunity to reach back literally thousands of years into the past and connect with people, yes, it's a one-sided form of communication. They can't speak back to you, or can they? I mean, as you play this game, the rules have barely changed for thousands of years. It's only a handicap value to establish a fair game which has changed. And so, to have that sense of culture and to be able to reach back, I love it. Also, I could talk about the fact that it is a game that clearly has potential to be studied for lifetimes and still not be mastered. But if I'm honest, the biggest reason that I absolutely adore Go is because of the handicap system, where you can say, here, I'm much better than you. You can start with 9 stones already on the board. Now, maybe I'll still win, but it will be fairer. And I'm not so amazing at it. I reckon that in a few days and a few weeks of play, we could play evenish games. You can't say that of chess. I mean, okay, you could do speed chess by having one person take less time, or you could remove some of the pieces on one side, but that's a completely different game. Whereas with Go, you just add some stones to one side of the board, to one colour, all around the board, and then that person we're still playing the same game, and it just makes it so much more accessible.
And I think you've got some way to answering this question, but do you think Go is much a cultural artifact as it is a game? I mean, if the world was ending, do you think Go should be taken to preserve, the beauty that humanity can create?
Absolutely, and if I were taking games from my shelves, sadly, the best I could do is a cardboard board and some plastic stones. But if you look at a proper traditional Go band, those are things of true beauty. And to have the shells, and the slates, it's lovely. And that would certainly be a wonderful piece of furniture to just look at and admire in the cabin.
So, the car, you're driving out of the city, you've got your foot down, and you're driving down the road, and you go around the corner, and the back door flies open. 4 of the games fly out down a ravine and are swept away down the river and are gone forever. Which game do you hope is sitting on the backseat of the car?
As arrogant as it sounds, I hope that Wibble++ is still staying, because I would like to continue to make games for the deck. I can think of so many games that I can play with it already, and it offers me so much more variety and so much more potential for things yet uncreated.
So if people want to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
So you can look at my Twitter on Stuff by Bez, or on Instagram I'm Stuff by Bez. You can look at my email if you want to contact me directly, stuffbybez@gmail.com, or on Facebook you can search for Stuff by Bez.
Well, fantastic, Bez. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
And if you want to suggest a guest, or if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on Twitter at 5gamesfordoomsday, or you can send me an email, 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/5G4D. And if I haven't had to cube my lats to avoid the ice cream shooting UFOs and the climate change deniers, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.